For centuries, the Amazon rainforest was seen as an untouched wilderness, a place beyond the reach of civilization. European explorers believed they had found a primeval world, teeming with life but devoid of history. But what if that view was never true? What if the jungle we thought was wild and empty was once the cradle of vast and complex civilizations? What if we've been walking through ruins all along, too blind to see them? Nearly 100 years ago, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett vanished in search of a lost city he called Z, a mythical metropolis he believed was hidden deep within the Amazon. He was mocked, ridiculed, and eventually forgotten. But now, with the help of modern technology, the forest itself is beginning to whisper the truth. Using LiDAR, a remote sensing method that shoots laser pulses through thick vegetation, scientists are uncovering what the human eye could never perceive. Beneath the canopy lies a network of geometric shapes, roads, canals, ceremonial centers, and even earthen pyramids, stretching across thousands of miles of rainforest. The jungle was not a barrier to civilization, it was its foundation. These discoveries are overturning everything we thought we knew about the Amazon. The forest, long considered pristine and untouched, was actually cultivated and engineered by human hands. Millions of people may have once lived here, their cities connected by rivers and roads. Their agriculture was sustained not by slash-and-burn farming, but by a mysterious, human-made soil known as terra preta, black earth. Rich in nutrients, self-regenerating, and still more effective than modern fertilizers, this soil may be one of the greatest agricultural innovations in human history. These weren't small bands of wandering foragers. They were ecological engineers, architects of forest cities, and perhaps, just perhaps, they were the real El Dorado. A city not of gold, but of green. A place so deeply in tune with the jungle that it vanished back into it without a trace. The European explorers never found it, not because it wasn't there, but because they didn't know what to look for. They expected fortresses and palaces. What they found instead were vines, soil, and silence. El Dorado, it seems, wasn't a lie. It was a misunderstanding, a mirror showing us how narrow our idea of civilization truly is. The gold hunters searched for treasure they could hold in their hands, but the real treasure was a culture so entwined with nature that it left no scars behind. A city invisible to conquest, but visible now, if we know where to look. And today, as the Amazon faces destruction from deforestation, these ancient sites are at risk once again. Bulldozers and chainsaws are wiping away what centuries of jungle had preserved. This time, it's not myth or greed that threatens the forest cities. It's apathy. We're losing them again, not because they're lost, but because we still don't recognize what we're destroying. Maybe one day, when we learn to see the forest not as a wilderness, but as an archive, the clues will finally come together. But the question remains, by the time we're ready to listen, will there be anything left to hear? The Amazon's buried cities suggest something remarkable, that ancient humans didn't just survive in this harsh environment. They mastered it. They transformed it. The forest wasn't their enemy, it was their partner. They created living cities shaped by the flow of rivers, the movement of animals, the patterns of rainfall. Their tools weren't stone and steel. They were water, fire, and biodiversity. And the traces of these lost civilizations are growing harder to ignore. Across Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, LiDAR scans have revealed more than 450 geometric earthworks, circles, squares, octagons, and causeways, many aligned to astronomical events. These weren't isolated efforts. They were part of an interconnected system, built by people with a shared worldview that saw geometry and the cosmos as deeply intertwined. In Bolivia's Llanos de Moxos, an area once dismissed as swamp, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of raised fields, oval platforms linked by canals and ponds. It's been called floating agriculture, but it was more than that. It was a massive ecological machine, a system designed not to conquer nature, but to work with it. They didn't drain wetlands. They learned how to live within them. They didn't burn forests to make farms. They enhanced biodiversity through companion planting. And through it all, they created terra preta, soil so rich in carbon and microbial life that it still supports crops centuries after it was made. To this day, no one has fully recreated its formula. Scientists are still trying to understand how it works, but it may have been the very foundation that allowed long-term settlement in the rainforest. Without it, forest cities may never have thrived. With it, they became possible. At sites like Quipu near the Brazil-Peru border, entire urban layouts have been mapped, complete with defensive walls, ceremonial plazas, road systems, and communal spaces. These were not simple villages. They were cities with social classes, infrastructure, and shared spiritual life. A civilization that built with mud and meaning instead of mortar and stone. The silence in our history books about these people isn't just due to time. It's due to tragedy. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they didn't just bring iron and horses. They brought disease. Epidemics like smallpox swept through the Amazon, wiping out up to 90% of the indigenous population. Whole cities emptied in a matter of generations, and the jungle crept back in, covering what was once alive with roots, moss, and thyme. Later explorers arrived and saw only forest, a few scattered tribes, no one left to tell the story, no one to remember the roads beneath their feet. And so, the myth of the untouched wilderness was born. But today, that myth is unraveling. Every rainfall that uncovers a pottery shard, every LiDAR scan that outlines an ancient plaza, every river that bends like a boulevard, these are fragments of a lost map. A map not just of geography, but of memory. And what's emerging from the forest floor is something that changes everything. A civilization that lived in harmony with one of the most difficult environments on Earth. A civilization that didn't just survive, it flourished. These weren't failed attempts at city building. They were success stories, stories that were violently interrupted. Like a symphony cut off mid-note, their memory didn't fade because it was weak. It vanished because the voices that carried it were silenced. Now, with every discovery, a new story is beginning to surface. A story of ancient intelligence, ecological mastery, and a definition of civilization that doesn't fit into our old molds. These cities weren't built to last forever. They were built to live, to breathe, to adapt. And perhaps that's why they disappeared. Not because they collapsed, but because they completed their cycle. And if the Amazon once held cities made of forest, perhaps that knowledge didn't stay buried. Perhaps it echoed outward, to other cultures, other corners of the ancient world. Perhaps it touched more than we realize. Because from the hidden cities of the Amazon, the path leads onward, to the deserts of Peru, where the ground itself is etched with symbols the size of football fields. Strange lines that stretch across barren rock, invisible from the earth but unmistakable from the sky. And as we follow those lines, we begin to see a deeper truth, that the ancient world was not primitive, isolated, or blind. It was connected, a tapestry of genius woven through soil, stone, and stars. A world where knowledge traveled in silence, memory hid in geometry, and the past never really disappeared. It just waited for us to find it. Almost a century after Percy Fawcett's disappearance, the jungle he once believed held a lost civilization is finally giving up its secrets, and those secrets are far more extraordinary than even he imagined. What was once dismissed as fantasy is now being confirmed by science. With LiDAR scanning, a technology that sees through thick canopy to the ground below, entire landscapes have been digitally peeled back. And beneath the emerald veil, what's emerging is astonishing. Interconnected earthworks, ceremonial plazas, canals, roads, irrigation systems, and even massive geometric structures scattered across the Amazon basin. These aren't scattered tribes. These are cities, hidden not by time, but by trees. For centuries, Western explorers assumed the jungle was too hostile to support large-scale civilization. But the forest, it turns out, was never empty. It was once full of people, of culture, of design, and intent. The old myth of an untouched rainforest, pristine and untouched by man, is breaking apart. In its place, a new picture is forming, one of a cultivated ecosystem purposefully shaped by the hands of millions who lived here long before European contact. They didn't just pass through this land, they engineered it. The scale is almost incomprehensible. At its peak, the Amazon may have supported tens of millions of people. Their societies were organized around rivers, using them as highways to connect settlements across thousands of miles. Their cities weren't made of stone and steel. They were woven from nature itself. Forest gardens, terra preta soils, planted trees that fed biodiversity. These people were not primitive. They were masterful stewards of their environment. And they left behind something no empire ever could, a living legacy, a forest that still remembers their touch. Terra preta, or Dark Earth, is one of the greatest mysteries of this lost civilization. This human-made soil, rich in charcoal, organic waste, and microorganisms, is still fertile after hundreds of years. In some areas, it's more productive than anything modern agriculture can offer. And it's not a localized accident. Terra preta has been found throughout the Amazon, stretching over thousands of square kilometers, a sign of deliberate and widespread ecological engineering. This wasn't trial and error. It was innovation, a forgotten technology that may hold the key to sustainable farming even today. Scientists still struggle to replicate its properties, but the ancient people of the Amazon created it with little more than fire, food scraps, and time. And they did it at scale. This soil may be the foundation upon which the forest cities were built. It allowed dense populations to thrive without destroying their environment. Instead of burning the forest down, they nurtured it. Archaeologists now believe that many parts of the Amazon we consider wild rainforest are actually ancient orchards. Clusters of Brazil nuts, cacao, and fruit trees don't grow randomly. They align with ancient settlement patterns. They are echoes of an invisible architecture. The jungle wasn't conquered, it was curated. And when you step back and see the full picture, it becomes clear. The Amazon was never just a jungle. It was a garden with cities built from earth and memory, now returning slowly to the light. At Quipu, a site near the Brazil-Peru border, researchers have mapped out an entire pre-Columbian urban complex. Defensive walls, moats, ceremonial plazas, and road networks extend through the forest. The layout reflects long-term planning, social hierarchy, and shared cultural rituals. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a city, planned, built, maintained, and sustained over generations. But when the Europeans came, all of that changed. The arrival of disease devastated these interconnected societies. Smallpox, influenza, and measles swept through the rainforest, killing up to 90% of the population in just a few generations. Without people to tend them, the cities were overtaken by forest. Roads disappeared under vines. Plazas became clearings. The terra preta fields lay dormant, mistaken for natural soil. Later explorers found nothing but silence. They saw only scattered tribes and deep wilderness. No one was left to explain the empty earthworks. No stories remained to tell the truth. The cities had been swallowed, not by failure, but by forest. And the myth of the untouched Amazon was born. But the forest remembers. Every buried potsherd, every LiDAR scan, every twist in the river that follows an ancient road. They whisper of a civilization that didn't need monuments of stone to prove its greatness. It left its memory in the living world. It's not just happening in one place. Across the Amazon, the evidence is piling up. In Bolivia, the Llanos de Moxos region reveals one of the largest known ancient agricultural systems on Earth. Thousands of raised fields dot the landscape, long oval-shaped mounds designed to remain above the floodwaters of the rainy season. These weren't isolated patches of farming. They were part of a vast network connected by canals, artificial ponds, and earthen levees. To the untrained eye, it looks like swamp, but to archaeologists, it's the remnants of advanced ecological engineering. The entire landscape was modified for food production. What seemed chaotic is now revealed to be ordered. What looked like wild marshland is actually one of humanity's most impressive agricultural experiments. And the brilliance lies not in domination, but in collaboration. These ancient engineers didn't fight nature, they partnered with it. The people of the Amazon created systems that worked with seasonal rhythms. They guided water instead of draining it. They planted diversity instead of monoculture. They built resilience into the very soil. And in doing so, they created something more enduring than any empire. They created harmony. That's why they left no towering ruins, no marble statues, no grand stone cities. Because their civilization wasn't carved out of nature, it was grown into it. But the absence of stone doesn't mean the absence of genius. At the site of Quipu, the spatial design reveals shared religious centers, planned urban districts, and transportation networks linking settlements across vast distances. The straight roads, some stretching for miles, suggest centralized authority and long-term vision. The complexity of these systems contradicts the long-standing belief that Amazonian societies were primitive or disorganized. The truth is much harder to accept, that entire civilizations lived here, thrived here, and were erased not by collapse, but by conquest. And by forgetting. We forgot to look, or perhaps we never wanted to. But today, memory is resurfacing. With every new LiDAR pass, with every unearthed ceramic fragment, the story becomes clearer. The jungle is revealing its history, not written in stone, but etched in the soil. And that history leads us toward a profound rethinking. If these civilizations existed, and they did, then our understanding of human potential must change. We must accept that intelligence wears many faces, that greatness can be silent, that memory can live in roots and rivers, not just libraries. These were not stone builders, they were stewards. Their architecture was not meant to defy nature, but to reflect it. Their legacy is not in ruins, but in resilience. And the clues don't end here. Because if a forest can hold cities invisible to the eye, then perhaps the desert can hold messages invisible from the ground. From the jungles of the Amazon, we now turn west, to the high desert of Peru, where ancient people once drew lines across the earth that no one could see unless they were in the sky. Lines that stretch for miles, shapes too massive to understand from the ground. Figures of animals, humans, and symbols carved into the desert floor with mathematical precision, a message that seems meant for someone watching from above. These are the Nazca lines, and they remain one of the most enigmatic creations in human history. But perhaps they're not so different from the forest cities. Perhaps they too are a kind of memory, a way of writing that doesn't use letters or paper, but space and silence. And just like the cities buried beneath the trees, the lines carved into the desert may speak not of gods or aliens, but of something much older, a different kind of intelligence, a way of seeing the world that we've forgotten how to understand. Because sometimes the past doesn't fade away. Sometimes it just hides in plain sight. Across the arid highlands of southern Peru, beneath a relentless sun and surrounded by silence, lies one of the most haunting mysteries on Earth. At first glance, the desert seems barren, a flat, rust-colored plain of gravel and dust. But rise above it, just a few hundred feet into the sky, and everything changes. Perfectly straight lines stretch across the landscape for miles. Giant geometric shapes emerge, spirals, trapezoids, arrows, and then the figures: a monkey, a hummingbird, a spider, a tree, a human, a pair of hands, all carved into the ground with such scale and precision that they can only be fully seen from above. This is Nazca. For over a century, the world has tried to understand why these lines exist, who made them, and what they were meant to say. And the deeper we look, the stranger the questions become. Because these designs are enormous. Some lines stretch over 12 miles. Some figures span hundreds of feet. Yet the people who made them had no airplanes, no helicopters, not even towers high enough to view their own work. So how did they know what they were creating? How could they design something that could only be understood from the sky, when they had never seen the world from that height? The Nazca civilization, which flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, left behind little else. No grand temples, no vast cities. But what they did leave is one of the most abstract and enduring creations in human history. A canvas the size of a desert, drawn not in ink, but in space. They made these lines not by adding anything to the earth, but by removing the top layer of dark gravel, exposing the pale sand beneath. That's all. No tools, no machines, just patience, proportion, and precision. And yet the mystery remains. Why? Some theories are grounded, others border on the fantastical. Could these have been astronomical calendars? Some of the lines do align with solstice sunrises or celestial bodies. Could they have mapped constellations or guided agricultural cycles? Could they have marked sacred pathways for ritual pilgrimages? Walking the lines may have been a way to pray, to call forth rain in a harsh desert where water meant survival. Others suggest the figures themselves, the monkey, the bird, the spider, were symbolic totems, spiritual guardians etched into the earth to communicate with the divine. Then there are the more fringe theories, that the lines were runways for ancient aircraft, that they were landing sites for extraterrestrials, or that they encoded messages not for us, but for the stars. Most archaeologists reject these ideas, but even the grounded explanations can't fully capture the magnitude of what was done here. Because here's the paradox: the desert is what preserved them. Nazca lies in one of the driest regions on Earth. Little rain, almost no wind, and no erosion. The lines have remained virtually untouched for over 1,500 years. No paint to fade, no walls to fall, just silence and shape. It's as if the desert itself wanted these figures to last forever. And when you walk among them, when you realize you're standing inside a design too large to see, it changes how you think. These weren't just drawings, they were a way of thinking. A language made not of sounds or symbols, but of space and ritual. There's no clear boundary here between art and science, between faith and geometry. In Nazca, they all merge. And that may be the point, because this wasn't a culture trying to explain the world with logic. It was a culture trying to feel its place within it. They weren't asking how, they were asking why. Not with words, but with movement, patience, and precision. The Nazca lines are not just a mystery, they are a reminder that the past doesn't always speak in ways we expect, that understanding doesn't always begin with explanation, and that knowledge can be drawn in dust, meant to be seen only by those willing to look from a higher place. And so, from the desert, we now rise higher still, into the mountains, into the world of the Inca. High in the Andes, where the air thins and clouds scrape the mountaintops, lies a civilization whose genius still stuns modern engineers. The Inca didn't build with steel. They didn't use mortar. They didn't even have the wheel. But they shaped the mountains themselves into empires. The heart of their world was Cusco, the navel of the earth. From there, their empire stretched across Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Over 25,000 miles of roads connected it all, roads that crossed deserts, forests, highlands, and cliffs. They built rope bridges that hung over ravines. They carved agricultural terraces into sheer mountainsides. And they moved stones weighing hundreds of tons without pulleys or cranes. But what's more remarkable than what they built is how they built it. At Sacsayhuaman, above the city of Cusco, massive stone blocks fit together like puzzle pieces, so precisely that not even a razor blade can slip between them. These are not straight blocks. They are complex, multi-angled shapes, carved to fit exactly together, without mortar, in ways that absorb earthquakes and defy modern explanation. No metal tools, no written blueprints, just knowledge passed down, somehow, through generations. Knowledge we still don't fully understand. At Ollantaytambo, the same story. Gigantic stones hauled uphill, perfectly aligned. At Tipon, a water system so advanced that its channels still flow with perfect precision today. And then there's Machu Picchu. Suspended between the clouds at 7,970 feet above sea level, this city wasn't discovered by the outside world until 1911. It had been hidden, not by accident, but by design. Every building, every wall, every window in Machu Picchu seems aligned with the sun, the stars, and the sacred mountains beyond. Water flows through it in quiet streams, carved into stone, whispering like a voice from the past. No one knows exactly why it was built. Some say it was a royal retreat. Others believe it was a sacred observatory. But walking its terraces, you feel something else, a sense of balance, of belonging. Because the Inca didn't impose themselves on nature, they shaped themselves into it. Every stone, every channel, every path was placed not in opposition to the land, but in harmony with it. Their worldview didn't separate humans from nature. It connected them. The sun, the moon, the mountains. All were alive, all were gods, All were part of the same sacred breath. And their genius wasn't just in architecture, it was in memory. The Inca didn't write books, they didn't use letters, but they recorded knowledge in one of the most mysterious information systems ever devised, the quipu. Knotted strings, that's all it was. A main cord with hundreds of colored threads hanging from it, each tied with different knots in different patterns at different intervals. To the Spanish, it looked like witchcraft, but to the Inca, it was everything. They tracked population numbers, food stores, tax records, tribute, possibly even laws, history, and myth. Quipu readers, the quipu kamayuk, could run their fingers over the strings and feel the information encoded in the knots. They read with their hands, not their eyes. They remembered with touch, not with ink. And here's the haunting part. We've lost the code. After the conquest, the Spanish destroyed thousands of quipu, and with them, the knowledge of how to read them. Today, hundreds survive in museums, and researchers are using artificial intelligence to decode them, to search for patterns, to find the language beneath the knots. But the truth is, we may never fully recover it, because this was not a civilization that wrote for us. It wrote for itself. It tied its memory into threads and passed them hand to hand, generation to generation, like a silent symphony played on fingers instead of instruments. And when you look at what they built, what they shaped, what they remembered, you begin to understand something deeper. That civilization is not always loud. That brilliance does not always build empires of stone and war. Sometimes it builds balance. Sometimes it builds in silence. Sometimes it ties a story into thread and lets the hands do the speaking. And when you gather all these threads together, from the Nazca Desert, the Amazon jungle, the Inca roads, and the quipu strings, a new pattern begins to emerge. A pattern that suggests the past was not isolated, that memory traveled, that maps were drawn long before we knew how to read them. Maps that show lands no one was supposed to know, shores that shouldn't have been seen, continents that appeared centuries too early. So who made them? And what if the discovery of the Americas wasn't a discovery at all? In the quiet archives of Europe, tucked into the folds of ancient parchment and dust-covered scrolls, there are maps that don't make sense. Maps that shouldn't exist. Maps that show coastlines drawn with stunning precision. Long before satellites, long before telescopes, long before the so-called Age of Discovery even began. Maps that make us question, who really saw the world first? Take the Piri Reis map. Drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral of the same name, it wasn't based on a single voyage. Piri Reis himself wrote that it was compiled from over 20 different source maps, some of them far older than his own era. He even claimed a few were passed down from the time of Alexander the Great. The result? A map that shows Europe and North Africa in remarkable detail. But more shockingly, it outlines the eastern coast of South America almost perfectly. And then there's the anomaly. Farther south, the Piri Reis map appears to depict the northern coastline of Antarctica, not as it is today, buried under miles of ice, but as it would appear, ice-free, bare land, mountains. Features we only confirmed in the 20th century using sonar and radar. So how did a 16th century admiral know the shape of a continent that modern humans had never seen? Some say coincidence. Others whisper something else. That this knowledge was inherited, copied, preserved, not created anew, but remembered. And the Piri Reis map isn't alone. The Oronce Fine map from 1531, the Zeno map from 1380. The Vinland map, which appears to depict Greenland and parts of North America, decades before Columbus set sail. All raise the same question: who mapped these lands first? In Korea, the Kangnido map of 1402 shows Africa with striking accuracy, at a time when European explorers still thought the southern tip of the continent was a myth. In China, records from the Ming dynasty describe vast naval expeditions. Admiral Zheng He's fleet, comprised of giant treasure ships, sailed as far as East Africa and Arabia. But some fringe theories suggest his voyages went farther, maybe even to the Americas. Are these just romanticized legends, or echoes of something real? Even the Incas and the Maya had symbolic codices, illustrations of boats, winds, and journeys from the east. Indigenous oral traditions speak of people arriving from across the ocean, long before Columbus, of pale-skinned strangers, of floating houses, of exchanges and departures. These stories were once dismissed. Now they demand a second look. Because at some point, the question stops being, "Is this true?" and becomes, "Why did we ignore it for so long?" History, after all, is not just what happened. It's what was recorded and what was allowed to be remembered. So if these maps are accurate and if the oral traditions hold weight, then we may have to confront a difficult truth: that the Americas were never truly discovered. They were visited, perhaps often. And if that's true, the next question is unavoidable. How did they get here? What routes did they take? What winds carried them? What knowledge guided their journeys? Because if early contact happened, whether by accident or design, there must be traces left behind. And maybe we've already found them. Along the Pacific coast of South America, archaeologists have uncovered ceramics with designs shockingly similar to ancient Chinese and Japanese pottery. On the beaches of California and British Columbia, pottery shards have been found with stylistic elements seen across the Pacific. In the Andes, there are statues and carvings with facial features not easily explained: wide noses, full lips, strong jawlines that resemble African art more than Andean. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when these anomalies repeat, when they show up in different places, at different times, they begin to feel like something more. In Ecuador, ceramic artifacts have been uncovered that match those from ancient Jomon Japan, both in style and firing technique. Some scholars believe this suggests a maritime link across the Pacific over 5,000 years ago. Could early Japanese fishermen or explorers have been swept across the ocean by the Kuroshio current? In Mexico, the Olmec civilization, one of the oldest in Mesoamerica, left behind massive stone heads. They are carved with precision, and the faces do not match the indigenous features of the surrounding region. Some researchers argue they resemble West African features, others suggest Polynesian. Still others say we shouldn't read too much into the stone. But when you put it all together, the maps, the pottery, the sculptures, the oral traditions, it paints a picture that challenges the official timeline, one of movement, contact, exchange, and nowhere is that challenge more shocking than in Egypt. In the 1990s, German scientists tested the hair of ancient Egyptian mummies. What they found defied logic: traces of tobacco and cocaine, substances native only to the Americas. Henut Tawi, a priestess buried over 3,000 years ago, showed strong levels of both. Tests were repeated, contamination was ruled out, and the results stood. If true, it means that products from the New World somehow reached the Old World millennia before Columbus. But instead of exploring the possibility, Most historians chose silence because the implications were too great. And yet the evidence didn't go away. It still doesn't. In Peru, there are stone carvings of boats that resemble Egyptian papyrus craft. In the Amazon, there are legends of visitors with strange clothing and bronze tools. And when explorer Thor Heyerdahl sailed from Africa to the Americas in a simple reed boat using ancient technology, he proved it was possible. Not easy, but possible. And maybe that's the key. Ancient people didn't need modern navigation. They had the stars, the tides, the winds, and most importantly, they had time. Journeys didn't need to be quick. They just needed to happen. Once. And if they did, if just one crew made it, one boat crossed the vast blue unknown, then contact was made, and history, as we know it, is incomplete. Because history is not always written in ink. Sometimes it's carved into stone, tied into thread, hidden in myth, or buried in sand. And as we dig deeper, one of the most daring theories of all begins to emerge. That during the Ice Age, long before any written language, before any empires rose, people from Europe may have crossed the Atlantic. They didn't come in galleons or Viking ships, they came in skin boats on ice sheets, following the edge of a frozen ocean. This is the Solutrean hypothesis, and it's next. It begins with a stone. Not just any stone, but a tool, flaked with intention, sharpened with purpose, and left behind by a culture that no longer has a name. Thousands of these tools have been found in eastern North America, dating back over 18,000 years. What's strange is how closely they resemble tools from another place entirely, tools crafted by the Solutrean people of Ice Age Europe. For decades, this similarity was brushed aside, called coincidence. But what if it wasn't? The Solutrean hypothesis suggests something once considered impossible, that during the height of the last Ice Age, prehistoric Europeans crossed the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of years before any other known migration. How? Not by sailing across open seas, but by hugging the edge of the ice sheet. Back then, the North Atlantic was very different. Sea levels were lower. Massive glaciers stretched from Europe to North America, creating an icy bridge across the ocean. Along the southern edge of that ice, rich marine life thrived. Seals, fish, seabirds, a corridor of survival. And the Solutreans, living in what is now France and Spain, were no strangers to this world. They were master toolmakers, skilled in hunting and survival. They crafted weapons from flint with a technique so advanced it wouldn't be seen again until thousands of years later. What if they followed the ice? What if they hunted seals along the edge of the Atlantic, using skin-covered boats like Inuit kayaks, stopping on ice floes, fishing, waiting, moving slowly, generation by generation, until they reached the far shore? It sounds fantastical, but then, so did flying machines, until someone built one. The evidence is thin, but it exists. Stone tools found in places like Chesapeake Bay bear remarkable resemblance to Solutrean technology, not just similar shapes, but identical methods of flaking and pressure carving. So far, these tools don't match anything else in the known Native American archaeological record. That doesn't prove the theory, but it does ask a question. If these tools aren't local, where did they come from? Genetic studies have added fuel to the debate. A small percentage of mitochondrial DNA found in modern Native American populations belongs to a haplogroup known as X. Most Native American DNA traces back to Asia, but haplogroup X doesn't. It's found today in Western Europe, especially around the Basque region. Could this be a genetic fingerprint left by ancient travelers? Maybe, or maybe not. The debate is heated, and the Solutrean hypothesis remains one of the most controversial ideas in modern archaeology. Critics argue there's not enough evidence that similar tools can emerge independently in different places, that genetics are too complex to draw firm conclusions, that the ocean journey would have been too difficult for Ice Age humans. But then again, every major discovery once sounded impossible. People once believed the idea of sailing west from Europe would end in falling off the edge of the world. We now know better, and the Solutrean theory, while still unproven, refuses to disappear, because it taps into something deeper than evidence. It speaks to curiosity, to the idea that human beings have always pushed beyond what they knew, that even during the most frigid, inhospitable chapter of Earth's history, someone may have looked across the ice and thought, what if there's something out there? Even if Solutreans never made it, they're part of a larger puzzle, a growing realization that prehistoric people were far more mobile, far more connected than we ever imagined. And once you open the door to that possibility, the past begins to shift. Because what if the story of humanity isn't one of isolated continents, but of forgotten contact? What if long before borders and nations, there were whispers across the sea? Let's go back to the Americas. All across this vast land, from the forests of the Amazon to the deserts of the Southwest, there are structures, stories, and systems that don't fit the traditional timeline. Ancient mounds in Ohio, shaped like serpents, hundreds of feet long, massive earthworks aligned with solstices, traces of calendars, astronomical observatories, and complex societal planning. These weren't primitive societies. They were thinkers, builders, observers of the sky. And they weren't alone. In South America, the city of Tiwanaku stands as one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Located near the shores of Lake Titicaca, high in the Bolivian Andes, Tiwanaku is a stone city unlike any other. Massive blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, carved with impossible precision. Not only is their craftsmanship astonishing, but their alignment is even more so. Gateways aligned with celestial events, platforms that point towards solstice sunrises, a calendar built into the architecture itself. The official story tells us Tiwanaku was built around 1,500 years ago, but some researchers believe it's far older, perhaps tens of thousands of years, based on astronomical alignments that would only make sense during Earth's earlier tilt cycles. If that's true, it means Tiwanaku may predate known history. Then there's Puma Punku, a site near Tiwanaku that defies explanation. Here, massive andesite stones are carved with precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Perfect 90-degree cuts, interlocking shapes, drill like boreholes in stone, too hard for bronze tools to scratch. How did they do it? No one knows. What we do know is that the people who built Puma Punku understood something we don't. Whether that knowledge came from earlier cultures, lost technologies, or forgotten methods, it leaves us wondering, what else have we missed? As we travel north again, we return to the forests. The Amazon, a place long seen as untouched, now revealed as once teeming with cities, roads, canals, and human-shaped ecosystems. But there's one element we've only just begun to understand: a mysterious soil, dark, rich, and unlike anything seen in modern farming. It's called terra preta, black earth. Scientists believe it was created by ancient Amazonians using charcoal, compost, and microorganisms to enrich the soil. Some of these terra preta patches are thousands of years old and still fertile today. No synthetic fertilizer matches it. How did they create it? More importantly, why did we forget it? This soil may be the key to sustainable agriculture in the future, and yet it comes from the distant past. A past where humans lived in harmony with the land, not conquering it, but enhancing it. And if this technology was once widespread, what else did these forgotten people know? What other secrets lie beneath our feet? Because scattered across continents, there are stories. In Africa, the Dogon people of Mali tell of star systems invisible to the naked eye, stories passed down long before telescopes were invented. In India, ancient Sanskrit texts describe flying machines, lost cities, and weaponry that echoes modern science. In South America, legends speak of Viracocha, a great bearded figure who arrived from the sea and taught the people before vanishing into the ocean again. Are these myths? Are they distorted memories? Or are they fragments of a forgotten world? One that reached higher, traveled farther, and understood more than we're willing to admit. Because in every great civilization, in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in Sumer, in the Andes, there's a recurring theme. Knowledge that appears suddenly, fully formed, mathematics, astronomy, architecture. It doesn't evolve, it arrives, as if it was remembered, not discovered, as if someone, somewhere, carried it forward. And maybe that's the true story of humanity. Not a straight line of progress, but a cycle of rising, falling, and rising again, of civilizations that reached for the stars, left behind traces, and vanished, leaving behind stone, soil, and stories, waiting for us to notice, waiting for us to ask the questions that were once forbidden. And now, we must, because what comes next isn't just a look at lost tools or misread maps. It's something stranger, something deeper, an ancient city lost in the jungle, a golden kingdom that's haunted explorers for centuries, a place called El Dorado, and the truth behind it is not what you think. They called it El Dorado, the Golden One. But it wasn't just a name. It was a vision of unimaginable wealth, of shining temples, of cities glittering with gold, hidden deep within the jungles of South America. For centuries, European explorers hunted for it. Conquistadors marched into the rainforest, convinced that somewhere a kingdom of gold lay waiting. They died by the thousands, lost, poisoned, starved. Yet still they searched, because they believed in the myth. But what if the myth was real? Just not in the way they expected. Because what they were looking for was gold. What they found was something else. As we've seen, the Amazon was never empty. It was full of people, of culture, of cities shaped not with stone and steel, but with soil, water, and biodiversity. But now, something even more startling is beginning to emerge. A theory, a possibility, that the legend of El Dorado wasn't about a literal city covered in treasure, but about a civilization so advanced, so vast, and so harmonious with nature that it appeared mythical to outsiders. It wasn't the gold that mattered, it was the knowledge. The gold hunters missed it. They were trained to see value only in what sparkled. They didn't recognize a city where trees were architecture, where rivers were roads, and where soil was technology. They stood in the ruins and saw nothing, because they weren't looking for life, they were looking for loot. But El Dorado wasn't built to be looted, it was built to endure. And now, centuries later, machines flying above the forest, using LiDAR technology to peel back the green canopy, are showing us what the conquistadors never saw. Grids, plazas, pyramids, roadways, aqueducts, a network of human habitation so dense, so deliberate, that it challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian South America. Some scientists now believe the Amazon may have supported 10 million people or more before European contact. These weren't scattered tribes. These were city builders. Their civilization wasn't lost because it failed. It was lost because it was erased by disease, by conquest, by centuries of silence. And so El Dorado faded into legend. Until now. Because as we piece together the ruins, the patterns, the terra preta, and the oral histories passed down through generations, a different kind of El Dorado begins to emerge. Not a place of gold, a place of wisdom, a civilization that didn't fight the jungle, but listened to it, learned from it, shaped it gently over centuries. It's no coincidence that many indigenous Amazonian languages don't even have a word for wilderness, because the forest was never wild. It was home. It was cultivated. Every vine, every tree, every stream, touched by human hands. That's what the gold hunters didn't understand. El Dorado wasn't hidden. They were just blind. And maybe we still are, because even now, as this ancient world re-emerges from the jungle floor, we're losing it again, to chainsaws, to bulldozers, to fire. The real El Dorado is disappearing not because it never existed, but because we never learned how to see it. And as the forest vanishes, so do the clues. Clues that could change our understanding of agriculture, climate, architecture, medicine, and sustainability. Clues that might hold answers to the crises we face today. Because what if the ancients already solved problems we're only just beginning to face? What if the solutions are buried in black soil, in forgotten roads, in abandoned cities that once thrived without polluting the earth? We're not just losing history, we're losing the future, unless we choose to see differently. And this choice to see isn't limited to the Amazon. All over the world, we're finding evidence that ancient civilizations were more advanced, more connected, and more aware than we ever believed. Evidence that was once dismissed, silenced, suppressed, but it's rising again. In the deserts of Peru, we find Nazca, those mysterious lines that can only be seen from the air. Geometric designs, animal shapes, pathways that may have guided ceremonies, aligned with stars, or communicated with forces we no longer understand. In the Andes, we see the stone genius of the Inca, walls so precisely cut, they still stand after centuries of earthquakes, canals that still carry water, rope bridges still woven by hand. In the depths of Lake Titicaca, we find underwater ruins, roads, temples, plazas, submerged and forgotten. Were they victims of rising water, or sacred spaces built to touch the divine? We see the quipu, knotted strings that may contain a written language we've yet to decode, a language of memory, of rhythm, of human touch. And we find the maps drawn centuries before explorers discovered these lands, maps that show coastlines hidden under ice, maps made with knowledge someone shouldn't have had unless someone had been there first. All of it points to one conclusion. History is deeper, wider, and far older than we've been taught. Our past is not a straight line, it's a labyrinth. And at every turn, there's something waiting, a clue, a whisper, a contradiction. Because maybe Columbus didn't discover the Americas. Maybe the Chinese got there first, or the Vikings, or the Polynesians, or the Solitarians. Maybe people have been crossing oceans for tens of thousands of years. Maybe the boundaries between Old World and New World were never as sharp as we believed. Maybe we've built our history like a fortress, neat, contained, easy to explain. But real history doesn't live in walls. It lives in ruins, in myths, in the things we buried because they didn't fit the story we wanted to tell. But now the walls are cracking, and what's emerging is something far more beautiful and far more challenging. A history that doesn't begin with kings or empires, but with forests, with stone, with stars. A history shaped not by conquest, but by curiosity. A history that doesn't belong to one people or one nation, but to all of us. Because these ruins, these artifacts, these mysteries, they aren't just about the past. They're a mirror. They reflect what we've forgotten. And they ask us one question. If ancient people could build sustainable cities in jungles, carve temples without steel, cross oceans without maps, then what are we doing? What are we choosing to forget? And what might we rediscover if we dared to remember? The lost civilizations of the Americas aren't lost because they disappeared. They're lost because we stopped looking. But now, the forest is speaking. The stones are whispering. The maps are glowing again under curious hands. And maybe, just maybe, we're ready to listen. Because history isn't finished. It's still unfolding. And the real El Dorado? It was never about gold. It was about memory. There's a reason we've long believed the Americas were isolated. It's because we've been taught to see history as a series of isolated islands. Europe here, Asia there, and the New World, sitting quietly in the background until 1492. But history is rarely that clean. And every so often, an artifact, a symbol, or a story slips through the cracks, challenging what we think we know. One of the most controversial of these challenges comes not from legends or myths, but from a scientific anomaly. In the 1990s, researchers studying ancient Egyptian mummies discovered something that should not have been there: chemical traces of tobacco and cocaine in the hair and tissues of Henut-Tawi, an Egyptian priestess buried over 3,000 years ago. The problem? Tobacco and cocaine are native only to the Americas. They didn't exist in Africa, Asia, or Europe in ancient times. At first, scientists assumed contamination. Maybe the samples were compromised. But after repeated tests on different mummies from the same era, the results kept coming back the same. Tobacco, cocaine, both New World plants, both in Old World remains. It raised an unsettling possibility. Could transoceanic contact have happened long before Columbus? Could goods, ideas, even people have crossed the Atlantic thousands of years ago? Mainstream historians were quick to reject the idea. The evidence, they said, was circumstantial. Maybe trade happened, but it wasn't widespread. Maybe there were natural explanations. But what they couldn't offer was proof. Proof that it couldn't have happened. And in the absence of proof, the question lingered. Across the Atlantic, in Mexico, the ancient Olmec civilization left behind something equally strange: colossal stone heads carved from basalt, each weighing several tons. But it wasn't just their size that puzzled archaeologists. It was their features: broad noses, full lips, deep-set eyes, characteristics that seemed to some more African than indigenous Mesoamerican. Coincidence? Possibly. But there are over a dozen of these sculptures, all with similar features. And they're not abstract or symbolic, they're detailed, intentional, human. Some independent researchers have pointed to these sculptures as possible evidence of ancient contact with African sailors, perhaps carried by the same currents that later helped ships from Europe make their way west. These aren't isolated curiosities. All over the Americas, from the Pacific coast of North America to the jungles of Ecuador, archaeologists have found fragments of pottery, tools, and artwork that resemble styles from Asia and Africa, sometimes eerily so. In British Columbia and California, certain indigenous ceramic styles bear strong visual similarities to ancient East Asian motifs, patterns, techniques, and even kiln structures that seem to echo Japanese or Chinese pottery thousands of miles away. In Ecuador, pottery resembling that of Japan's Jomon culture, known to date back 5,000 years, has been unearthed, showing not only similar decorative patterns, but nearly identical firing methods. So how could that happen? One possibility is that early Japanese mariners, perhaps caught in storms or following the powerful Kuroshio current, drifted across the Pacific and made landfall on the America's western shore. Accidental voyages turned into cultural footprints, small traces left behind, buried in time. It wouldn't be the first time the Pacific helped deliver unexpected visitors. Oceanic drift patterns can carry objects and vessels thousands of kilometers. If early seafarers had even rudimentary knowledge of currents, they could have island-hopped or coast-hugged their way into the New World, not as invaders, but as wanderers. In Polynesia, the seafaring skills of ancient peoples were so refined that they could navigate by stars, ocean swells, and bird migrations across thousands of miles, long before the compass or sextant. There's evidence that Polynesians reached South America, trading chickens and sweet potatoes, both of which have been found on opposite sides of the Pacific long before European contact. Yet these pieces are often dismissed as anomalies, oddities, not worth rewriting the timeline over. But piece by piece, they add up to a bigger picture, one that suggests the ancient world was far more interconnected than we've given it credit for. Even ancient texts hint at forgotten journeys. In the Chinese records of the Tang and Ming dynasties, there are vague but compelling references to lands across the ocean. Places where red-skinned people grew maize, lived near great rivers, and worshipped the sun. Indian epics speak of distant islands and lost continents, reachable by ship. These may be metaphor, or they may be memory, the last echo of a voyage now long forgotten. And maybe that's the issue. For centuries, our history has been filtered through a narrow lens, one that privileges written records, empire building, and conquest. Oral traditions, symbolic artifacts, and unconventional data don't fit neatly into that model, so they're brushed aside. But the question remains, what if the Americas weren't discovered? They were remembered. What if ancient peoples weren't waiting to be found, but had already been part of a larger, forgotten human story? One that linked distant continents, not by conquest, but by curiosity. It's not about rewriting history, it's about restoring it, giving space to the voices that were never written down, listening to the patterns in stone, in soil, in myth, and asking, what else have we overlooked? Because if early Africans or Asians made it to the Americas even once, that changes everything. It forces us to rethink migration, technology, motivation. It tells us that ancient people didn't see oceans as barriers. They saw them as bridges. And perhaps the most radical idea of all, that cultural contact didn't always come in the form of conquest. Sometimes it came quietly. A pottery shard left behind, a carving passed down, a story whispered by a fire, long after the sails disappeared on the horizon. But what if some of the boldest journeys happened even earlier, not in ships, but on ice? That's where we turn next, to a theory so controversial, so fiercely debated, that it's been ridiculed for decades, and yet It refuses to go away. It's called the Solutrean hypothesis. And if it's true, it means that prehistoric Europeans may have crossed the Atlantic during the Ice Age, thousands of years before any known civilization existed in the Americas. Imagine a time over 20,000 years ago. The world is locked in ice. Glaciers stretch across northern Europe and North America. Sea levels are lower, exposing massive land bridges and narrow straits. In this frozen world, a hunter-gatherer culture emerges in what is now France and Spain. They are the Solutreans, known for their finely crafted stone blades etched with a skill that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. Their tools are distinctive, leaf-shaped, pressure-flaked, symmetrical. So distinctive, in fact, that they bear a striking resemblance to Clovis points. The stone tools made by the earliest known culture in North America, dating back around 13,000 years. The similarity is more than stylistic, it's technological. The flaking patterns, the craftsmanship, the techniques all suggest a level of skill that didn't evolve gradually in the Americas. It seems to appear out of nowhere, and it just so happens to resemble the tools made by Solutreans across the ocean thousands of years earlier. Coincidence? Maybe, but proponents of the Solutrean hypothesis argue otherwise. They propose that during the Ice Age, a group of Solutrean hunters followed the southern edge of the polar ice sheet, moving from Europe to North America along the frozen Atlantic. They didn't need ships in the modern sense. They could have used small watercraft, perhaps hide-covered canoes, traveling along the edge of the ice, fishing, hunting seals, and navigating by the sun and stars. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Modern Inuit communities still use similar techniques to travel and survive in the Arctic. And during glacial maximums, the Atlantic wasn't the vast open sea we know today. It was a corridor of ice, punctuated by migratory sea life and seasonal pathways. Of course, the theory is controversial. Critics argue that the dating is flawed, that the similarities in tools are coincidental, and that there's no genetic evidence linking Solutrean people to Native American populations. But the debate continues, and with every new excavation, the line between what's possible and what's provable gets thinner. At its core, the Solutrean hypothesis challenges the long-held belief that the first Americans came exclusively from Asia, crossing the Bering Land Bridge and moving south. That theory still holds weight. There's strong genetic and archaeological evidence to support it. But what if it wasn't the only migration? What if the Americas were reached from both directions, east and west, ice and land, Asia and Europe? Different peoples, different times, different routes, all converging on a continent that was never truly isolated. If even part of the Solutrean hypothesis is true, it means that humanity's story is even older, even more complex than we've imagined. That long before writing, long before the first cities, humans were already reaching beyond their known world, seeking something on the other side of the horizon. Not because they had to, but because they could. And perhaps that's the thread running through all these mysteries. The mummies, the maps, the myths, the tools, a restless, enduring impulse to explore, to connect, to leave a mark in a world that often forgets. That impulse didn't begin with Columbus. It didn't begin with the Vikings. It began with something far older, the human need to understand what lies beyond. And now, as we uncover more evidence, decode ancient knowledge, and challenge our assumptions, we're beginning to see that the past we thought we knew was only the surface. There's still one more layer left, a final chapter buried beneath the very foundation of history. A chapter we'll uncover next. We've come this far, through ruins and rainforests, myths and maps, fragments and firelight. But there's one last story buried deeper than all the rest. A story not carved in stone, or preserved in thread, or hinted at in cartography. It's buried in the soil, in the shapes of mountains, in the way rivers bend and earth rises and falls. The final chapter of the lost civilizations of the Americas is not about what we've already found. It's about what we still don't understand. Because scattered across this continent are colossal, intentional shapes, earthworks too massive to notice up close, too precise to be accidental, and too old to be easily explained. From above, they form symbols, animals, spirals, and lines that stretch for miles. They weren't built with stone tools or steel machines. They were shaped by hand, by generations of people moving Earth one basket at a time. Take the Nazca lines, for example, etched into the high desert of Peru. Massive geoglyphs, some the size of skyscrapers, only fully visible from the air. Lines that form hummingbirds, monkeys, jaguars, and other forms that make perfect sense from the sky, but from the ground seem like nothing more than long, meaningless trenches. For centuries, they were dismissed as ceremonial or artistic. But some align with astronomical points. Others seem to follow underground water sources. What if they were more than just ritual? What if the Nazca people were leaving messages? Not for themselves, but for someone above. And if that sounds far-fetched, consider this. The Inca and pre-Inca cultures had no known aerial technology. They had no reason to build art, visible only from the sky, unless they were remembering something, preserving an image of something once seen, or preparing for the return of someone who once saw them. In North America, the mystery deepens. The Mississippi Valley is home to thousands of mound structures, some shaped like animals, others like spirals or platforms. The most famous is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, over 1,300 feet long, curving like a snake with an egg-shaped head pointing directly at the setting sun on the summer solstice. It's not just a mound, it's a calendar, a monument, a memory. Who built it? Mainstream history credits the Adena, or fought ancient cultures, but no one knows exactly when or why. Radiocarbon dating varies, and the alignment, so astronomically precise, suggests a knowledge of the cosmos far more advanced than we usually attribute to so-called primitive peoples. These mounds weren't random. They were deliberate, mathematical, symbolic, and they're everywhere, across Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, Mississippi, and beyond. Hundreds of them, thousands. A civilization that mapped the heavens in Earth. Further west lies Chaco Canyon, an ancient city of stone roads, observatories, and towers aligned with celestial events. It's been called the American Stonehenge. At its peak, it was a hub of activity, with buildings rising 4 stories high, perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. Roads stretched for miles in perfectly straight lines, some of them leading nowhere, or maybe leading to memories now buried. Across the desert, the Puebloan ancestors left behind petroglyphs, spirals, starbursts, and strange figures with elongated heads and radiant halos. Were they gods, astronomers, visitors, or something even more complex? These symbols echo across continents. In the Amazon, deep in the jungle, deforestation has revealed something stunning. Massive geoglyphs, visible only from above. Circles, squares, interconnected roads, and ditches. For years, we thought the Amazon was untouched wilderness. But the soil itself, the dark, fertile earth known as terra preta, was engineered, created by humans. It doesn't occur naturally, it was built. This means entire civilizations lived here, thriving, farming, organizing, long before modern colonizers arrived. Some researchers estimate that millions of people once lived in the Amazon basin. They didn't just survive the jungle, they shaped it. And when those civilizations fell, through disease, conquest, or climate, the jungle grew back, swallowing their memory whole. Until now, satellite imaging, LiDAR, and drone technology are peeling back the canopy. Underneath lie roads, canals, grid-like city layouts, mounds, and raised fields, evidence of a massive, interconnected network of urban planning. Hidden for centuries, known only in whispers. But why would a civilization build so much, only to disappear? Some believe it was conquest, others say it was plague. But there's another theory, one that's harder to accept. What if these civilizations didn't disappear? What if they withdrew? Or worse, what if they remembered something we've forgotten? Something about the cycles of time, the rhythms of the stars, or a catastrophe that comes again and again, wiping the slate clean. Ancient myths speak of floods, of sky fires, of falling stars, and nights without dawn. Native American legends describe visitors from the sky, ancestors who taught them agriculture, astronomy, and timekeeping. They call them star people, sky brothers, or shining ones. Are these just stories, or are they encoded memories, preserved through generations in symbol and ceremony? Even in Central America, the Mayan long count calendar didn't just track time, it measured great cycles, ages, civilizations rising and falling, repeating over tens of thousands of years. The end of one age was never the end of time, only the end of memory. So what are we left with? Traces, fragments, clues, but also questions, endless, aching questions. How much knowledge did we lose when these civilizations fell? How many scrolls, codices, and oral histories were burned or silenced? How many stories remain in the ground, waiting for the right eyes to see them? And more than anything, what else is out there? Because every time we think we've found the edge of history, something new emerges. A buried city, a forgotten script, a tool that shouldn't exist. And suddenly, the past shifts, the story changes. That's the beauty and the danger of forbidden history. It challenges our comfort. It disrupts our narrative. It forces us to confront the possibility that the world is older, stranger, and more connected than we ever imagined. So what do we do with that knowledge? Do we dismiss it? Or do we listen? Do we cling to the safety of what we've been told? Or do we dare to imagine what might have been? Because buried beneath the soil, beneath the jungle, beneath the sea, are voices. Voices of architects, navigators, astronomers, engineers, storytellers. Civilizations not lost, but waiting. Waiting for us to remember. History, after all, doesn't sleep. It waits. Beneath every stone, behind every myth, inside every question we were too afraid to ask. And now, you've asked. You've looked where others refused, listened where others mocked, wondered when others dismissed. That makes you dangerous. It makes you part of something ancient. A long, unbroken line of questioners, seekers, listeners. People who know that the truth is never finished, and that sometimes the darkest corners of the past hide the brightest sparks of the future. Because this story, the story of the lost civilizations of the Americas, was never really lost. It was hidden, and now it's calling back.